The night a man in a sequined vest paired me off with the one woman in the room nobody wanted, I finally understood what weddings are actually for. They aren't about love. Not really. Some people come to celebrate. The rest come to watch who gets left over, and to quietly make sure it isn't them. A wedding is a room deciding who counts, and everyone smiles the whole time they do it. My name is Nathaniel Ford. Most people call me Nate. I was 43 that October, sitting at a table with a number on it in a barn full of string lights outside Middlebury, Vermont, watching rain slide down the tall windows like the sky had somewhere better to be. I survey land for a living. Property lines, easements, where one man's yard legally stops being his problem and becomes his neighbor's. I spend my days deciding exactly where things end. It's steadier work than it sounds, and quieter than most people would tolerate, which is probably why I like it. I was single for a reason that doesn't make a good story. I married at 24, split at 35, and there was no villain in it. Rachel wanted a city that moved and a life that kept getting bigger. I wanted a dirt road and a dog and the same coffee mug every morning. We spent 11 years slowly discovering we'd packed for 2 different trips, and then we admitted it, and then it was over. No affair, no screaming. Just 2 decent people signing paperwork and being unusually polite about it. I wasn't bitter after that. I want to be clear about that. I was just tired. Peaceful, even. I had made friends with quiet. My family did not make friends with quiet. The groom was my cousin Danny, a good kid who grinned like a golden retriever that had just learned its own name. And half the Ford side of that barn had spent the cocktail hour asking when it would be my turn. My Aunt Sylvia had asked me twice, which is impressive, because I'd only seen her once. My mother had weaponized the phrase, "You'd make such a good husband," until it landed somewhere between a compliment and a citation. So I did what any self-respecting man does at a family wedding. I found a table in the corner, ordered the second cheapest wine, and made myself the kind of small that discourages conversation. That was how I ended up at table 12. Every wedding has a table 12. It's the one the coordinator builds last, out of leftovers. A recently divorced cousin. A coworker who had to be invited for reasons of office peace. The great aunt who says things. And, that night, a woman in a deep green dress sitting alone at the far end, watching the dance floor the way I watch a property line, like she already knew exactly where it ended. Her name, I'd learn, was Marian Alcott. She was maybe in her mid-50s, silver hair pinned up in a way that said she'd decided a long time ago it wasn't worth the argument, reading glasses hanging from a chain she probably forgot she was wearing. That's one line of description, and it's all you get, because the thing that actually made you look at her wasn't her face. It was her stillness. Not shy. Still. Like someone who had walked into a room, understood its temperature in 3 seconds, and decided not to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her flinch. She caught me looking. Instead of pretending she hadn't, she lifted her glass a half-inch, the way you toast a stranger you've silently agreed to survive an evening with, and said, "Table 12. Congratulations. You've been sorted. Is that what this is?" It's where they put the ones who don't fit the seating chart's little story. She glanced at the head table, where Danny was feeding Claire, the bride, a bite of something. Every wedding writes a story. We're the footnotes. I like footnotes, I said. That's where they keep the interesting part. She looked at me then, actually looked, the way people rarely bother to at a wedding, and one corner of her mouth moved like it was thinking about smiling and hadn't cleared it with the rest of her face yet. "We'll see," she said. Then the bandleader ruined it. He was a man in a sequined vest who treated the microphone like it owed him money. The kind of professional master of ceremonies who has decided that joy is a thing you administer to a crowd whether they consented or not. He'd already made everyone do the chicken dance. He'd already pulled the grandparents up for the anniversary song. And now, sensing the energy dip that comes after cake, he went hunting. "All right," he boomed. "I need all my single folks on this dance floor. Don't be shy. You know who you are. Your family sure do." The laugh that got was the specific laugh of people relieved it wasn't about them. I stayed in my chair. I am very good at staying in my chair. But Danny, God love him, had clearly told the man which cousin to look for, because the spotlight, an actual spotlight, swung to table 12 and the bandleader said, "You in the corner! Big guy! Up, up, up. Don't make me come get you." Here is the thing about that moment. It's the moment I want you to see clearly, because everything after it depends on it. When I stood, the room did that tiny shift people make when they think they're about to watch something interesting. The quick glances. The suppressed smiles. A groomsman named Brody leaned back in his chair and folded his arms like he'd bought a ticket. Somebody raised a phone, and the bandleader, scanning for a partner to pair me with for the bit, for the laugh, landed on the nearest single woman, which was Marion, and I watched the whole room arrive at the same joke at the same time. The math was cruel and instant. The tired, divorced cousin and the aunt nobody talks to. Look at those two. Isn't that something? Marion's face didn't change, but her hand, resting on the stem of her glass, went very still, and I understood that she had done this arithmetic long before I had, probably her whole life, and that the worst part of it for her wasn't the joke. It was that she'd expected it. The bandleader was already grinning, already reaching for the easy comedy of shoving two reluctant people together. Come on, you two, don't be shy. And I did the only thing I've ever been genuinely good at, which is refusing to play the part a room hands me. I didn't shuffle. I didn't do the awkward comic reluctance that would have let everyone laugh and move on. I walked across that floor like I'd been invited, and I stopped in front of Marion Alcott, and I put out my hand, palm up, and I said, loud enough for the front tables to hear, I've been trying to work up the nerve to ask you all night. I was hoping the band would give me an excuse before I ran out of wine. The room went quiet in a different key. Marion looked at my hand, then at me. You don't have to do that, she said, low, just for us. I know, I said. That's sort of the point, she stood. She put her hand in mine, and it was steady, and the band, cheated of its punchline, defaulted to actually playing a song, something slow with a brush drum, and I put my other hand at her back the way my grandfather taught me, and we danced. Properly. Turned out she could actually dance, better than me, and she took over the lead by the second turn without asking, and I let her. And somewhere in there, the room realized there was no joke coming and lost interest and went back to its drinks. By the time the song ended, we weren't a bit anymore. We were just two people on a dance floor who'd stopped performing for anybody. That was reckless, she murmured as the last note faded. I'm a surveyor, I said. I calculate risk for a living. And what did the numbers say? That the man leaning back in his chair over there was going to be disappointed no matter what I did. Might as well pick which way, she laughed. It surprised her, I think, the way it came out, short and real and low. Nathaniel Ford, she said, reading my name off the little card still clipped to my lapel. There's a mouthful. Nate. Marion. She let go of my hand, but slowly, like she was returning something borrowed. Well, Nate, I hope you didn't have plans for the rest of your night, because you've just become the most interesting thing at table 12, and I don't intend to let that go to waste. The rain got serious around 9. It came down hard enough to send the smokers scrambling and the tent side of the reception into a small crisis of folding chairs. And in the reshuffling, Marion and I ended up on the covered porch of the old orchard barn with 2 glasses and a view of the apple trees going silver in the downpour. She had her arms crossed against the cold in a way she was too proud to complain about, so I took off my jacket, the good canvas one I'd worn against my mother's advice, and held it out. I'm fine, she said. You're shivering. I'm proud. It's a different muscle. But she took it, and she put it on, and my jacket swallowed her, and she pushed the sleeves up and didn't give it back, and I decided not to want it back. So, I said, footnote, whose wedding is this really? Claire's. She nodded toward the barn, where somewhere inside the bride was laughing at something. My niece. My sister's girl. You raised her. She turned and looked at me sharply. Why would you say that? The way you watch her. Like you're checking your work. Marion was quiet for a long moment. On the porch railing sat a little cardboard box of wedding favors somebody had abandoned in the scramble, small glass jars of orchard honey with the couple's names on paper lids, and she picked one up and turned it in her fingers like it gave her something to do with her hands. Her mother, my sister Dana, died when Claire was 6, she said finally. Car went off a road in the rain, actually. Rain like this, she said it flat. The way you say a thing you've said until it stopped being able to cut you. I was 28. I was going to move to Portland. I had an apartment lined up and a job at a firm and a whole life folded up in boxes. And then I had a 6-year-old who kept asking when her mom was coming home, and I unpacked the boxes and I stayed. For 30 years. For 30 years, she set the honey jar down. So yes, I raised her. And tonight I gave her away, more or less, and a man in a sequined vest decided I was a comedy bit. She looked at me. You weren't supposed to make it not funny. It's easier when it's funny. Why? Because if it's a joke, I'm allowed to leave the room. She checked her watch, then a small gold wristwatch that was clearly older than the dress, older than the room, and I noticed she did it the way some people touch a wound to see if it still hurts. I've gotten very good at leaving the room, Nate. I didn't understand yet what she meant. I thought she was talking about weddings. Well, I said, for what it's worth, you're the only person here I'd cross a room to talk to. And I already did it once tonight in front of everybody, so my dignity's spent. You might as well tell me the rest. She looked at me over the top of the honey jar for a long time, rain roaring on the roof, my jacket around her shoulders. Buy me a bad cup of coffee tomorrow, she said, and I'll consider it. The coffee was, in fact, bad. It came from a diner off Route 7 with a name I've forgotten and a waitress who called us both Han before we sat down, and the mugs didn't match. Mine a chipped green one and hers a fat, white one with a faded State Fair logo, and I have thought about those two mugs more than I've ever thought about any wedding china in my life. Marion showed up in jeans and a sweater with my jacket folded over her arm. You could have kept it, I said. I don't keep things, she said, handing it back, and sat down across from me, and that was the first sentence she told me about herself that I should have heard as a warning. We talked for 3 hours. She was funny in a way that took a second to arrive, dry and exact, the kind of humor that respects you enough not to explain itself. She told me about 30 years of raising a kid who wasn't hers on paper, the school forms that had a blank for mother and a blank for father and none for whatever she was, the birthday parties she'd faked her way through, the teenage years, which she described as a hostage situation where I was also paying the ransom. She never once made it sound noble. That's how I knew it had cost her everything. Do you regret it? I asked. No, she said, without hesitation. Then, after a sip, I regret that there was nothing left over. You give a life away in daily installments, and you don't notice the account's empty until the kid's grown and gone, and you're standing in a house that's suddenly too quiet, holding 30 years of somebody else's childhood and not one thing that's yours. She turned the State Fair mug a quarter turn on the table. I don't say that to Claire. She'd feel guilty, and it isn't her fault. She was 6. You don't bill a 6-year-old. What did you want? Before? She smiled at the mug. Portland. The firm. A different name on a different door. A pause. A man, maybe, who wasn't scared of a woman who came with a child and a mortgage and a permanent look of exhaustion. I dated a little over the years. It never took. Turns out ready-made family, some assembly required isn't the pitch men line up for. She looked up. And now I'm 55, and I've done the thing, and Claire's married, and I get to find out what I want when there's almost none of the wanting window left. That's a grim way to put it. I'm a realist. It reads as grim if you're an optimist. She checked the gold watch again. I noticed it again. You keep checking the time, I said. You have somewhere to be? Something flickered across her face, quick, there, and gone, like a fish under ice. Old habit, she said. It was Dana's. My sister's. I've worn it 30 years. Checking it is how I make sure I'm still on schedule. Schedule for what? She smiled, and it didn't reach anywhere. You ask a lot of questions for a man who measures dirt. I measure where things end, I said. It's a very specific skill. You develop an eye for edges. She held my gaze for a second too long. Then you should be careful with me, she said lightly. I'm all edges. I didn't understand that yet either. But I paid for the bad coffee, and I walked her to her car, an old Volvo with Vermont plates, and I noticed, because I notice things, that the back seat was full of boxes, neatly packed, labeled. A whole life folded up. Moving? I said, keeping it casual. Decluttering, she said, and got in, and drove off, and I stood in the diner lot telling myself that was the truth. I stayed in town longer than I'd planned. I told myself it was the job, that I had a survey to finish for a client near Virgins, which was even true. But I saw Marion 4 more times that week, and none of them were about the job. I helped her carry those labeled boxes out of a house that echoed. It was Claire's childhood house, the one Marion had unpacked into 30 years ago. And it was mostly empty now, sold, closing at the end of the month, and Marion moved through it like a museum guide who was also the exhibit. That's where she did homework. That's the wall we measured her against. See the pencil marks. That's the window Dana would have looked out of if Dana had ever seen the place. She said it all in that flat, worn, smooth voice, and I carried boxes and said little because I'd figured out by then that she didn't want sympathy. Sympathy was just another way of being told you were the sad one. She asked me, on the 3rd day, to settle an argument she was having with the man buying the house. There was a fence, an old split-rail thing between her yard and the neighbors, and the buyer's inspector claimed it sat 2 feet over the line, and Marion, on principle, refused to lose 2 feet to anybody in her last month of owning the place. So I brought the Transit out of my truck and set it up in her yard while she stood over me with coffee and opinions. "You're enjoying this," she said. "I'm a professional. This is my Super Bowl. You set up a little telescope on a tripod to look at a fence." "I set up a precision instrument," I said, "to tell a man exactly where he's wrong. There is no better job in America." I sighted the line, drove a stake, ran the string, and set my plumb bob against it so it hung dead true. "There," I said. "The fence is fine. The inspector's off by 14 inches. The line's been where it's supposed to be the whole time. Everybody just guessed." Marion looked at the taut string, the little brass weight hanging perfectly still at the end of it, and something moved across her face. "That's a strange thing to watch a person do well," she said. "Find the actual line instead of the one everybody assumed. It's the whole job. People fight for years over where they think a boundary is. Almost nobody goes and checks." I coiled the string. "It's usually somewhere kinder than they feared, or somewhere they can live with, at least once they know it's real." She didn't answer that, but she kept the stake. I saw it later, weeks later, still standing in the corner of a yard that wasn't hers anymore, and I understood she'd left it on purpose, one true mark in a place she was walking away from. There was a road trip, too, if you can call 40 minutes to a storage unit in Rutland a road trip. She had to drop the last of Dana's things, boxes she couldn't bring herself to open and couldn't bring herself to throw out, and she didn't want to do it alone, and she was too proud to say so, which is why she said, "You can drive, since you've got nothing better to do," which is how proud people ask for company. We drove in the rain with the heater ticking and the radio low. She was quiet most of the way, then not. "You ever wonder," she said, watching the wipers, "how much of your life you spent just holding a place open for somebody else? Being the chair nobody sits in until the person who's allowed to arrives? That's bleak highway talk. It's a bleak highway." But she smiled a little. "I raised a whole person, Nate, start to finish. And there's no word for what I am to her. Not mother, not really aunt, not the way people mean it. I'm the woman who was there, the placeholder that stayed." "You're the point," I said. "You've got it backwards. Everybody else at that wedding was decoration. You're the reason there was a bride." She looked over at me for a second, then back at the road. "You say things like that like they don't cost anything." "They don't. They're just true," I told you. "I have an eye for where things actually are." At the storage unit, she stood in front of the open metal door for a long minute, boxes of her dead sister stacked in the dark, and then she closed it without going in and got back in the truck and said, "Not today." And I drove her home and didn't say a word about it, and that, I think, was the moment she started to trust me. Not the dance. The silence in the truck after the door came down. We got dinner twice. She cooked once, at the half-empty house, a pot of something on a stove she was days from leaving, and laughed at me when I didn't know how to hold a knife, and put her hand over mine to fix my grip, and left it there 1 second longer than the lesson required, and neither of us moved. 2 mismatched mugs on the counter. Her sweater sleeves pushed up. Rain on the window, because it's always raining in this part of the story. "You're easy to be around," she said, not looking at me, stirring something that didn't need stirring. "That's dangerous." "Why dangerous?" "Because I'm leaving, Nate," she said it to the pot. "Sunday. There's a job in Tucson, a real one, my old field. A firm that doesn't care that I'm 55 as long as I still remember how to do the work. I've got an apartment. It's paid for. The boxes are packed. I was going to be gone the morning after the wedding, actually. Slip out during the getaway car nonsense. Nobody would have noticed for a day." I set down the mug I was holding. "That's what the watch is about." She went still. "You keep checking a schedule," I said slowly, "because you already had a departure time. You were leaving that night. The wedding was the last thing on the list." Marion turned off the burner. For a while, she didn't say anything, and the only sound was the rain and the tick of a house cooling. "Claire doesn't know," she said finally. "She thinks I'm taking a trip. If I tell her I'm going for good, the day after her wedding, she'll cancel her own honeymoon to sit with me and feel terrible, and I have spent 30 years making sure that girl never had to feel terrible about me. So no, I leave quietly. It's the last gift." She wiped her hands on a towel very deliberately. "I stayed an extra week because of you. That was a mistake. A nice one, but a mistake. I should have said something enormous right then. I want to tell you I did. Instead, I said the smallest true thing I had. The dance floor, that whole bit with the bandleader. That wasn't random, was it? You knew something." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Claire arranged it," she said. "My clever, guilty girl. She told the band leader to pull her aunt onto the floor and find her a partner because she'd noticed the whole reception treating me like furniture, and she couldn't stand it. She wanted me to have one dance where I was the point instead of the punchline. Marion shook her head. She meant it as love. It came out as a joke, because that's what happens to love in a crowd. It gets edited by everyone watching. And then you stood up. She looked at me. You weren't supposed to happen. You were an accident inside her plan. And now I have to leave anyway, and you've made it so much harder, and I'm honestly a little angry at you about it, so don't go. Don't. Her voice cracked, just at the edge, and she hated it. I could see her hate it. Don't do the thing where you fix it in a sentence. I have spent my entire life being needed. Do you understand? Needed, necessary, indispensable. And here you are, and you don't need me for one single thing, and that is the most terrifying feeling I have ever had, because I don't know how to be wanted. I only know how to be useful, and then leave before anyone finds out I'm out of uses. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it for a moment. Then she took it back, gently, and put it on the counter between us like it was a thing she was returning. Go home, Nate, she said. It was a good week. Let it be a good week. So I went home, and I let it be a good week, and the good week turned my ordinary life gray in a way I wasn't ready for. I went back to survey stakes and property lines and the same coffee mug every morning, and none of it fit right anymore. I'd notice edges everywhere, and none of them were hers. My jacket smelled like her for 2 days, and then it didn't, and I caught myself standing in my own kitchen, holding it like an idiot. My mother called to ask if I'd met anyone at the wedding, and I said no, and the no sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. There was a jar of orchard honey in my truck door that I'd grabbed off that porch railing without deciding to, and I couldn't bring myself to open it or throw it out, so it just rode around with me, catching the light. The work didn't help the way work usually helps me. I'd stand at a property corner with the transit dialed in perfect and think about a string pulled true across a yard she didn't own anymore, and about how good I was at finding exactly where everything ended and how bad I apparently was at finding where anything should begin. A client asked me a simple question about an easement, and I had to ask him to repeat it twice. I made coffee in the chipped green mug because I didn't have the fat white one. That was hers, in her kitchen, 40 minutes away, and I resented my own mug for not being the right mug. That's a strange kind of tired, resenting a mug. I told myself the right things, that she was 55 and had made a plan and had every right to it, that I wasn't going to chase a woman who'd literally packed the car, that I'd been divorced once and knew exactly what it cost to want somebody who was already halfway out the door. I told myself I was being mature, peaceful. I was very good at peaceful. It took my cousin Danny, of all people, to call me on it. He phoned about a thank you gift, some cousin errand, and at the end he said, casual, "Hey, Claire's real torn up. Her aunt left for Arizona. Just took off. Claire's been crying about it. Says she should have stopped her." When? I said. Sunday. Like, this Sunday coming. Claire's driving over Saturday to say bye. A pause. You met her, right? Marion? At the reception? Claire said you two hit it off or something. I looked at the honey jar in my truck door. I have spent my whole professional life determining exactly where a boundary sits, and I realized, standing in my gray kitchen, that I'd let the most important line in my life get drawn by somebody else's fear and called it respect. Marion had spent 30 years leaving rooms before anyone could ask her to stay. I'd spent 1 week doing the exact same thing and calling it maturity. I drove to that half-empty house on Saturday. The Volvo was in the drive, packed to the roof. Marion was on the porch with a thermos and my honey-colored October light going long behind her, and when she saw my truck, she didn't look surprised. She looked tired, which is worse. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "Probably not." I climbed the porch steps and stood there, and for a second neither of us said anything, because there was too much and nowhere to start. So I did what surveyors do. I started at a known point. "I brought your honey back," I said, and held up the little jar, which was the dumbest possible opening line, and she looked at it, and something in her face gave way about a millimeter. "That's my niece's wedding favor," she said. "You stole a wedding favor. I took a wedding favor. There's a difference. Ask any surveyor about the difference between taking and stealing. We have opinions." She almost smiled. She sat down on the porch step. I sat down next to her, careful, leaving a hand's width between us, and we looked at the packed car. "Say your piece," she said. "You drove all this way. I can see it on you. Say it and then let me go." "I don't have a piece," I said. "I have a question." "Then ask it." I looked at the Volvo. "The night we danced. You told me you're good at leaving the room, and I've been thinking about that all week, because I do it too. Different room, same trick. I left a marriage and called it peace. I left you and called it respect. And here you are leaving a whole life and calling it a gift. I turned to look at her. Marion, what are we so afraid is going to happen if we stay? She stared straight ahead. The gold watch ticked on her wrist. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. That we'll get comfortable, she said, and then it'll be taken. That's what happened to Dana. She was comfortable. She was happy. She had a little girl and a good life, and it was raining, and then it was gone. Her hands tightened around the thermos. I decided, when I was 28, that I would never again be caught with something I couldn't bear to lose. So I only ever held things I was allowed to hand back. Claire was never mine to keep. Every man I met, I made sure I'd be the one to leave. That way it never gets taken. You can't lose what you gave away first. And how's that working? She laughed, wet and short. I'm sitting on the porch of a house that isn't mine, with a car full of boxes, next to the first person in a decade I don't want to leave, planning to leave him. So, not great, Nate. It's not working great. There it was. I let it sit. Some silences you have to let finish. I still miss her, Marion said after a while, and I didn't have to ask who. Dana. 30 years and I still reach for the phone. And some days I look at Claire and I'm so proud I can't breathe. And some days I look at her and I see everything I gave up, and I hate that those two things live in the same chest. She wiped her face fast, angry at the tears more than sad. And some days lately, she said, quieter, I've caught myself thinking about a green diner mug and a man who measures dirt, and that terrifies me more than any of it, because it means I've started wanting something again. I know, I said, because I did. You can't fix this, she said. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to stay in the room. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she had at table 12, all the way in. Ask me, she whispered. I've spent my whole life leaving before anybody could ask me to stay. So if you're going to ask, ask, but mean it, because I'm too old and too tired to survive being asked by someone who's only being kind. I took her hand. This time she didn't return it. Stay, I said. Not because Claire needs you, not because anybody needs you. Nobody's assigning you a room this time. Stay because I want you in mine. That's the whole reason. It's not a good enough reason to build a life on, except it's the only one that ever is. She was quiet for a long, long time. The light went from honey to rose. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked and gave up. Then she took off the gold watch. She held it in her palm, looked at it, this thing she'd used for 30 years to make sure she was still on schedule to leave. And she reached over and set it in my hand and folded my fingers around it. Hold this, she said, her voice not quite steady. I don't want to know what time it is for a while. I leaned over and kissed her, once, careful, the way you'd handle something you'd finally been allowed to keep. Her hand came up to my jaw and stayed there, and it was the not moving of that hand that told me everything. When we pulled apart, she pressed her forehead to mine for half a second, breathing. You unpacked the car, I said, or I'm going to look ridiculous driving home. You already look ridiculous, she said. You brought back a honey jar, but she was laughing. Finally, the real one, low and bright, and she didn't let go of my hand while she did it. She didn't go to Tucson. Claire found out anyway, because Claire is not stupid. And instead of the guilt Marion had spent 30 years dreading, her niece drove over, walked into the half-empty house, looked at the two of us standing there, and burst into tears of the good kind. I set that dance up, she confessed, hiccuping. I told the band leader. I just wanted you to have one nice thing. And Marion held her and said, You did, sweetheart. You have no idea what you did, over the top of her head, looking at me. We took it slow, because we were both people who knew what fast cost. She kept the Volvo, but she unpacked it. She took the Tucson firm's offer of remote work instead, 3 days a week, which turned out to be the thing she'd actually wanted all along, the work without the leaving. I finished the survey near Virgins, and then I surveyed a 2-acre lot off a dirt road that I'd had my eye on for years, and I marked the corners with my own stakes and set my plumb bob against the string and got the lines exactly true, because if I was finally going to build something to keep, I wanted the edges honest. We got married 18 months later, not in a barn. In the yard of the house we built on that 2-acre lot, in front of maybe 20 people, on a day that started raining at noon and nobody moved inside, because by then we'd both made our peace with rain. Claire was the maid of honor. Danny cried more than anyone, which surprised no one. There was no band leader. There was, at Marion's insistence, one slow dance, and she took the lead by the second turn, same as the first time, and I let her, same as the first time. The gold watch sits in a dish by our door now. She doesn't wear it anymore. Every so often I catch her looking at it, and she'll say, "Still don't know what time it is," and I'll say, "Good," and that's the whole conversation, and it means everything. When people ask how we met, Marion usually says, "A man in a sequined vest tried to make a joke out of me, and a stranger refused to laugh." I usually say, "My cousin's bandleader pointed a spotlight at the most interesting woman in the room, and I was smart enough to walk toward it." Both are true. Neither is the whole truth. The whole truth is that two people who had gotten very good at leaving rooms sat on a porch with a stolen jar of honey and a borrowed watch and decided, for once, to stay. The honey jar's empty now. It sits on the kitchen windowsill holding a single wildflower most of the year, whatever's blooming on the lot. The two mismatched mugs came home from that diner with me eventually, the chipped green one and the fat white State Fair one. And they're the ones we actually use, every morning, the same two. Because I'm a man who likes the same mug every day, and it turns out so is she. My canvas jacket lives on a hook by the door, and she still steals it, and I still let her. And the brass plum bob I used to set the corners of our lot hangs from a nail over the kitchen window, dead still on its string, because Marion asked me to put it somewhere she could see it. "It's the only thing in this house that's never once pretended to be somewhere it isn't," she told me. I like being reminded that's possible. Sometimes the person who finally sees you isn't the one who had you first, or needed you most. Sometimes it's just the one who crosses a crowded room, in front of everybody, when the smart move is to sit still and laugh along. And sometimes staying is the bravest thing a person who spent their whole life leaving can possibly do. What would you have done if a whole room decided you and a stranger were a joke, and you had to choose, right then, whether to play along or walk across the floor and offer your hand? And have you ever loved someone who had gotten so good at leaving first that the hardest thing you ever did was simply ask them to stay? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.